Well, it was years ago, of course. It's impossible not to get, acquainted with Norman's work, because it's in very important cities, and I don't quite recollect where it was, but I was impressed, and this is something that impressed me the very first time I faced spaces designed by Norman Foster, because they're all very kind of discrete spaces, almost invisible architect, and then after you have seen a couple of them, it's very obvious it's Norman Foster's. This is something I really like about his architecture, and that's why I was very impressed the first time I saw his building, and I was aware, it was the same architect that I had seen before. I'm always fascinated by Norman's brain, because, as I said before, it's at the same time very creative and at the same time very orderly. It's a very sort of, at the same time, these two ideas that could be paradoxical or contradictory, but they are not. He's very creative, and at the same time he knows exactly what he's after. Well, I think, the Norman Foster's Foundation Archive, Norman Foster's archive, after all, is quite interesting and quite relevant, because it tells us a lot about his own, not only career. He's an obsessive, I would say, drawer. He draws and draws and draws non-stop with lots of different projects and ideas, etc. And I have the feeling that it's a very kind of very intriguing archive, because at the same time you get to know Norman Foster as an architect, but at the same time you get to know about his obsessions and his ideas and all this kind of inner world of Norman Foster. So that's why the archive is so specifically interesting, because it's of course it's the archive of a great architect, and at the same time it's the archive of a very imaginative mind, which is something we tend to forget. I think archives are a little art piece. They are an art piece, and at the same time they are a visualization of time and space. Today an archive is not as it used to be some few years ago. Archives today have their own entity, and artists are looking at archives, to look for solutions to their own work, etc. So to me, archives today, of course, an archive always creates a narration and a narrative, and this is inevitable, I would say. But at the same time, as I said, I always try to see them more like a performance. An archive is, to a certain extent, a performance of the owner of the archive, of the person rearranging that documentation. It's a performative work that changes and varies and takes different forms. So it's a living creature. Well, I think his drawings are the essence of his architecture. I think all in buildings, all that is shown in buildings comes from this idea of drawing. There's some architects that probably are more technical to a certain extent, more technically oriented. But you see Norman all the time is drawing. No matter what. He's sitting in front of a round table, and he would be sketching and imagining, spaces, etc. And I think this is what makes his architecture the way it is, from my point of view, because it's an architecture that is, of course, sometimes it's absolutely technical from many points of view. But at the same time, it's a kind of his imagination, his manual work is always implied in these very carefully designed spaces. So to me, as a viewer, as an art historian, I could never separate his drawings from his architecture. I think it's both of the same imagination, I would say, project.